I was sitting on my deck drinking sweet tea and watching the sun sink below the pines, when Karen zoomed up in her golf cart, like a race car driver with a wine obsession. "You and your porch are lowering the property values." That is when I stood up, grinned, and said, "Guess I better call the gang then." She thought I meant family. I meant the local motorcycle gang I fix engines for. Now I know what you are thinking. Wait, what? How do you even pull that off lawfully? And how does she not notice? Hold tight, because if there is one thing I have learned since moving into this Karen-infested suburban jungle, it is that these people are really good at seeing what they want to see and even better at ignoring what they do not grasp, like me or leather jackets, or the concept of minding your own matters. I did not grow up here. I received my aunt's house after she passed, sweet lady, tiny garden gnome collection, and a savage talent for lemon meringue. She had lived here peacefully for over 30 years. Not once had she gotten a single HOA notice. Me, I was 2 weeks in when the first letter showed your porch seating does not conform to community aesthetic standards. I had 2 wicker chairs, a faded blue cushion, and a chipped coffee table that had been through a divorce. And a cyclone. I guess the Karen committee decided that was offensive to their sensibilities. At first I laughed it off. I mean, it is just a porch. I was not throwing keggers or painting it neon green. But the letters kept coming. Then came the passive-aggressive notes, slipped into my mailbox with no stamp, then the cold glares. When I walked my dog, it was like being in a Step Forward Wives reboot, but the horror was not subtle. It was scented like gardenias and wine spritzers. I met Karen officially at my first HOA meeting, you know, the type: icy bob haircut, oversized sunglasses indoors, and an aura of misplaced superiority so thick you could spread it on toast. She welcomed me with the kindest smile dentists warn you about, said she hoped I would maintain the standards that made Oak Hollow Estates a desirable place to live. I told her I planned to breathe and sit down occasionally. Apparently that was too much. After that, it was open war. She started posting photos of my porch to the community Facebook page, not with my name, of course, but captions like, "Is this the look we want?" and "Who brought the barroom energy?" made it pretty clear who the target was. One post had a close-up shot of my sweet tea mug with the caption, "Is that alcohol?" Someone commented, "Disgusting behavior," and Karen liked it. Still, I did not bite. I knew the game. If you react too fast, you play on their turf. No, I needed to wait, and while I waited, I started planning. Let me pause for a moment and say this. I am not some reckless rebel. I pay my taxes. I do not key cars or let my dog poop on your grass, but I spent 15 years working in a motorcycle repair shop, and if there is one thing I learned from the guys there, it is this: revenge is best served on 2 wheels, with a side of grilled meat and roaring exhaust. I fixed bikes for every kind of rider you can imagine: weekend warriors, retired soldiers, even a biker preacher. If you can believe that these were not criminal types, they were just loud, loyal, and ready to repay a debt. When it mattered, I had patched engines for free. When they were down bad, lent them tools, even helped one guy rebuild a ride after a wreck, and they never forgot it. So when I made a few calls and said, "Hey, I got a little situation brewing in suburbia," let's just say the calendar filled up quick. But I am getting ahead of myself. The real breaking point came 3 days before the porch blow-up. Karen came by in sunlight, clipboard in hand, with 2 of her carionettes in tow, Carol and Susan, who looked like they run a secret PDA mafia. She did not even knock, just walked up like she owned the place and said, "We have received multiple complaints that your porch is being used as a social space." I blinked. "Is not that what porches are for?" She smiled that poisonous little smile and said, "Not here. We aim to project refinement, not tailgate culture." Tailgate culture? I did not even have a grill out there. She handed me a written notice. I was in violation of Article whatever of the HOA code, stating that porches must only include HOA-approved seating, no more than 2 chairs, and no visible beverage containers. Beverage containers? She was coming for my tea, I said. And if I do not comply, Karen's eyes sparkled, then the board may vote to impose fines and eventually legal proceedings for non-compliance. I looked at the other 2, who were nodding like wind-up figurines. That is when I smiled, because in that moment I knew she thought she had won, and I also knew deep down in my soul that this was going to be so much fun. I took the notice, folded it carefully, and said, "Well, you know what, maybe you are right. Maybe I do not belong here." That is when Karen's mouth curled into that smug little expression. That looks like a grin tried to become a frown but got stuck halfway. She had no idea that I had already texted Big Mike and Razor, and that the weekend forecast called for roaring engines and smoked ribs as she marched back to her golf cart. She muttered just loud enough for me to hear. Some people bring the whole neighborhood down. I just waved. The funny thing is she really believed she had the moral high ground. She did not know half the neighborhood already thought she was a dictator in capri pants, or that her newsletter was a weekly joke in the group chat I was secretly part of, or that her picture perfect world was about to get shattered upside down by a woman with a wrench, a porch, and a few very loyal friends with a whole lot of chrome. But just when I thought I had the upper hand, something happened that made me hesitate. That night I found an envelope taped to my front door. No stamp, no handwriting, just a printed message inside: "You do not know who you are." Messing with that is when I realized Karen was not just annoying, she was playing a different game entirely, and I was not the only one. She had done this to I had no idea how deep this went, but I was about to find out. I was not sure what disturbed me more, that Karen had crossed the line from petty to threatening, or that she had done it in such an eerily indirect way. That typed note was still sitting on my kitchen table, as bland and lifeless as the woman who likely typed it on the same computer she used to make HOA violation logs. I stared at it, then stared out at my porch, now bare aside from two sad HOA-approved chairs and a table that looked like it belonged in a clinic waiting room. It felt like I was losing a quiet war no one else could see, except instead of bullets it was newsletters and passive-aggressive Facebook posts. I could have let it go, could have packed up and played nice, but if Karen thought she could scare me into rolling over, she clearly had not done her research. By Monday morning the fines started to roll in. Not physically, not yet, they are too smug for that, but electronically. I got an email from the HOA's regulation officer named Brad, who I had never seen in person but was starting to imagine as a man with no chin and a Bluetooth headset permanently attached to his ear. The email listed my pending infractions, including unapproved porch use, non-conforming beverage containers, and the latest edition improper paint finish on exterior chairs. They were pastel approved HOA colors, but apparently mine were too bright. Brad included a helpful PDF with suggested muted tones that looked like someone bled out a Home Depot catalog. I did not respond. I did not pay, but I did go to the store and buy a brand new outdoor throw pillow shaped like a chicken wearing sunglasses. I placed it squarely in one of the two allowed chairs. No one could say a word about it. It did not count as furniture, but Karen saw it. I know, because she drove past 3 times that afternoon, each time slower than the last, her eyes squinting behind those oversized sunglasses like she was trying to burn a hole through my spirit. Using sheer disapproval, she did not say anything that day. She was saving it, planning something that was fine. So was I. Later that week I got a knock on my door from my neighbor Ellie, who lived 2 houses down and always wore oversized hoodies with sarcastic slogans and had the weary vibe of a woman who had been to too many PDA meetings and survived them. Out of spite, she handed me a mason jar of lemonade and said, "Do not let her get to you." She did the same thing to the Sandersons last year. They had a statue on their lawn. Next thing you know, fines, citations, threats, sold the place and left in 6 weeks. I thanked her and asked if anyone had ever pushed back. She shrugged. Most people just give in or move. But I think you might be different. That stuck with me. Different. I was not trying to make a point at first. I just wanted to sit on my porch, drink my tea, and grieve in peace. But now it was personal. Karen did not just hate my chair, she hated the idea of someone not bowing to her fake throne. And if she wanted to make it a battle of wills, I had a whole lot more fighting me than she expected. The next day I got 3 more violation notices, 1 for excessive outdoor conversation. Yes, I had dared to talk on the phone while sitting outside, 1 for visible beverage container, and 1 for unauthorized social interactions. That last one made me laugh out loud. Social interactions, like I was running a club out there. I imagined Karen sitting in her living room, binoculars in one hand and wine in the other, ready to pounce the second I so much as waved at a passer-by. She was not just obsessed, she was hooked to control. So I leaned in. I started hosting my phone calls right there on The porch talking just loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to be cited for. Noise complaints. I ordered the most ridiculous decorative mugs. I could find a skull with flowers of pink. Flamingo with a handle, even one shaped like a toilet bowl. Each day, I used a new one. I added a doormat that said Porch Pirate Welcome. I was not breaking any rules, I was balancing on the edge of every one of them, and Karen, she was losing her mind. She stopped driving by and started walking, pretending to get her steps in while she roamed my house like a hawk. With a clipboard, the rest of the neighbors started. Noticing some grinned, a few waved. One guy from the corner came by and said, "You are braver than I am. Karen is like the HOA Terminator. She does not stop." I just smiled and said, "Well, she has not met my backup yet." The reinforcements were coming slowly, carefully. I had spoken to Mike, Razor, and Jenna, three of my closest biker friends who owed me more than a few debts. They were not troublemakers, but they had a presence, loud bikes, louder laughs, and a way of occupying space that disturbed the fragile sensibilities of suburbia. I told them to come by next Saturday. We were not breaking any laws, just stopping by to say hello. But before Saturday came, I got another surprise. I came home Friday afternoon to find a folded flyer taped to my front door. HOA emergency meeting, community conduct vote agenda. Item 1, proposal to limit personal use of front porches and forbid unsanctioned gatherings. I stared at it for a full minute. She was trying to get a vote to literally ban porch sitting unless it was approved. She had gone full dictator. This was not just about me anymore. She wanted a neighborhood of robots and rose bushes. I went to the meeting, walked in with my rooster pillow under one arm and a mug shaped like a hen in the other. The room went quiet. Karen looked triumphant. The vote began. The hands went up faster than I expected. Fear does that. People just wanted to avoid being targeted next. And then Karen looked at me with a smug, polished grin and said, "The motion passes." I did not flinch. I just nodded, stood, and said, "Well, I guess it is time." I called the gang. A few people looked puzzled. Karen looked suspicious, but it was already done. Texts had been sent, plans made. The next morning, at exactly 10:47, the distant sound of Harley engines echoed down the street, 15 of them gleaming, chrome leather jackets and thunder, and Karen, she was standing in her driveway in her morning gown, frozen like a statue as the bikers rumbled past her. Like the world's angriest parade, but that was not even the part that shook her. It was what they brought with them that she never expected, because they were not just there to ride, they were here to help. And that is when things really started to unravel. The sound was the first thing that hit the neighborhood, a low, thunderous rumble that made windows tremble and birds scatter from trees. It started distant like a coming storm, then grew louder, closer, unmistakable. I told them 10:47, and they did not disappoint. The engines roared as they turned onto our pristine cul-de-sac, a procession of chrome and leather cutting through the dullness of Oak Hollow Estates like a black marker on a wedding invitation. I was already sitting on my porch, rooster pillow in place, mug in hand, when they pulled up. The looks on the neighbors' faces were everything I had hoped for and more. Shocked, curious, and a little bit scared. And Karen, she stood dead still in her driveway, her eyes wide, mouth slightly open, gripping a coffee cup like it was the last hope on earth. There were 15 of them, some I had known for years, some just owed a promise or two, but all of them knew why they were here. Big Mike was the first to dismount, his boots hitting the pavement like war drums. He nodded at me and said loud enough for every pair of twitching blinds to hear, "Looks like you could use a hand." I smiled sweetly and replied, "Funny, I was just thinking the same." Behind him, Razor popped open the back of his truck and pulled out a portable barbecue. Jenna, who could outdrink and out curse a sailor, already had a folding table in her arms. They moved with purpose, efficient and relaxed, setting up in my driveway, not the porch, because we were not breaking any rules, not a single one. That is what made it so perfect. Every beer can stayed sealed, and in a cooler. Every chair was on the driveway. No amplified music, just a Bluetooth speaker playing soft retro rock. We even had trash bags set up to clean up after ourselves. We looked wild, sure, but technically we were law-abiding guests on private property. The cops were called within 20 minutes. I expected it. Karen would not miss that chance. What I did not Expect was for Officer Langley to show up, the same cop who had responded when Karen once called. In a suspicious vehicle that turned out to be the Amazon delivery van. He walked up, took one look at us, and chuckled. Afternoon, he said. Everything legal here, Big Mike handed him a bottled water and said, sure is, officer, we even sorted the waste. Langley looked around, nodded, and said, you all have a good one. Karen watched the entire exchange from her porch like a villain watching the hero. When in the third act she was fuming, shaking, and absolutely helpless, the neighbors started emerging not long after that. At first it was just a few brave ones testing the waters. Ellie wandered over, hoodie on, holding her own travel mug and grinning like a kid at a celebration show. I got to say, she whispered to me, this is the most fun this neighborhood's had in 10 years. I handed her a plate with a sandwich and said, stick around, we have got ribs coming up next. Word spread faster than gossip in dry brush. Before long, we had a dozen residents standing around, chatting, laughing, asking questions about the bike. One of the older men, Mr. Harris, who rarely left his house except to complain about lawn lengths, ended up getting a ride around the block with Razor and came back looking 10 years younger. The neighborhood kids were thrilled. Their parents were nervous at first, but when they realized the bikers were friendlier than Karen ever was, things shifted. Someone even brought out cookies. I did not ask questions, I just made sure no one went thirsty. Karen, meanwhile, was on her phone, calling, texting, pacing. At one point she tried to challenge us directly. She marched across the street with her arms crossed and said, this is completely inappropriate behavior for this community. I looked at her and replied, which rule are we breaking? She hesitated, clearly caught off guard. It is disruptive. Jenna Midberger said, so is your personality, but we let you stay. A few people laughed. Karen turned red. I am calling another meeting, a formal one. Big Mike leaned in, looked Karen dead in the eye, and said, you do that, we will bring the deviled eggs. She spun around and stormed back to her house like she expected lightning to strike us on the spot. It did not, but we did turn the music up just a little. By the time the sun started going down, we had more neighbors show up than any HOA event in the past 5 years. People were bonding, talking, laughing. It was almost like community, genuine, raw, loud, beautiful community, the kind that Karen had tried to scrub out of existence. I realized then that she had not just been targeting me, she had been monitoring the entire neighborhood into bland, obedient submission. All it took was one noisy afternoon to break the spell. Of course, that did not mean the war was over, not even close. The next morning, another flyer was taped to my door. Emergency meeting again. HOA President Karen requesting immediate changes to noise, guest, and driveway rules. I laughed when I saw it. She had seen how quickly things could spiral out of her control, and now she was scrambling to tighten the grip. I was not worried, not anymore, not after the biker barbecue turned half the neighborhood against her, but I did notice something else on the flyer, a list of issues she planned to bring to the vote, and there, buried halfway down, was a mention of dangerous individuals with suspected criminal associations. She was trying to paint my friends as threats that crossed a boundary. They had been respectful, kind, they had come to help, not harass. Karen was going to damage them just to save face. I knew I could not let that happen, so I made another call, not to the gang this time, to George. George was not a biker. George was a lawyer, a very good one, and more importantly, he owed me a favor too. Back when he was rebuilding his old Harley, I had rebuilt the engine from the ground up for free. He told me if I ever needed him, he would be there. I told him about the flyer, about the claims, about the way Karen was using the HOA like her own personal army. He listened. Then he asked me one question. Does your HOA charter include any clauses about abuse of power? I did not know, but he promised he would find out later. That night I got a text. She has made a mistake, a big one. We will talk tomorrow. I looked out at my porch, at the quiet street, at the fading smell of grilled ribs still clinging to the air. Karen thought she had silenced me. What she had actually done was hand me a loaded legal loophole wrapped in arrogance, and I was going to use it. The next meeting was only days away, and this time I would not be showing up alone. The next HOA meeting was not in the usual community center room with the weak coffee and folding chairs. Karen had moved it to her own home, citing security concerns and disruptive behavior at recent gatherings, which was funny considering the only thing that got disrupted last time was her control. The email invitation had the usual frosty tone. But this time it also included a warning: any unauthorized guests or individuals unrelated to the community would be asked to leave. It was a blatant shot at my biker friends, and everyone knew it, but what Karen did not know was that I had no plans of bringing them back. Not this time. This time I was bringing someone she could not scream over or wave a clipboard at George. When George stepped into her living room, it was like someone had opened the door and let in a gust of cold air. He was not flashy. No leather, no loud voice, no attitude, just a well-cut suit, a worn briefcase, and a quiet certainty that made everyone sit a little straighter. Karen tried to challenge him right away. Of course, she asked who he was representing, said the meeting was private, that he was creating an unsafe environment. He calmly replied, "I am here as a legal advisor to a member of the HOA. If this is an official meeting concerning fines, votes, or sanctions, then by law my presence is allowed." She did not have a response to that, not one that did not sound like she was throwing a fit. In a pantsuit, the room was packed. More residents had shown up than usual, and I could feel the shift in mood. People were not smiling at Karen anymore. They were not nodding automatically. They were watching, waiting, some with arms crossed, others with narrowed eyes. The biker barbecue had done more than prove a point. It had shaken people out of their silent obedience. It had reminded them that they did not have to live under her thumb. Karen opened the meeting by reading a written statement which included her usual spiel about upholding values, protecting property values, and maintaining decorum. Then she went in hard on external threats and infiltration of unwanted influences. That was her new phrase for it. Not bikers, not people, influences, like she was fighting off a virus. When she finally stopped talking, George stood up. He was calm, polite, but precise. He began by referencing the HOA charter and reading out a specific clause, Section 7, Article C, which stated that any HOA board member found to have used their position to harass or target specific residents with repeated baseless infractions could be subject to removal by vote of the community. Then he pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of every violation notice I had received over the past few months. He passed them out. Every single one was minor, petty, unsupported. He did not even need to say it. The crowd read through them in silence, and you could feel the shame settle in like fog. Karen tried to interrupt. She called it character assassination. George did not flinch. This is not about character. This is about documented behavior and abuse of official power, and under the charter the residents here have the right to address that. Then I stood up. I did not say much, just told them how I had inherited the house from my aunt, that I had come here trying to heal and build something new, that I had tried to be quiet, respectful, and follow the rules until the rules were used like a weapon. I told them I had not fought back with lawyers or lawsuits or noise complaint. I had fought back with kindness, with cookout, with friendship, and if that was offensive to the HOA's sense of order, maybe it was the order that needed changing. The room was quiet for a long beat after that. Then Ellie stood up. She said Karen had once cited her for leaving her recycling bins out too long by 20 minutes. Then Mr. Harris, who said he had not dared repaint his front door in 10 years because of Karen's warning. More stories followed, one after another. Little things alone that did not seem like much, but stacked together, it was a pattern. Karen knew the tide was turning. She tried one last defense, said everything she did was for the community, that she had worked hard to maintain standards, that without her property values would plummet and the neighborhood would fall apart. But no one clapped, no one nodded, and for the first time since I had met her, Karen looked uncertain, maybe even nervous. Then George said it plainly, "If the board is ready, I believe it is time for a vote." Karen stammered that there was not enough notice, that the bylaws required time. George smiled. Actually, for emergency board action under Section 9, Article D, only a 51% vote from attending members is needed for immediate leadership review. We voted, hands raised slowly, at first, then faster, one after another. Ellie, Mr. Harris, the quiet woman with the twin toddlers, even Brad, the rulebook compliance officer, raised his hand like he was afraid she would bite him, but too tired to keep pretending. In the end, it was not even close. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president. On the spot, she stood there, red-faced and trembling, then stormed into the kitchen and slammed a cabinet door so hard a mug fell and smashed. No one followed her over the next few days. Things changed fast. The board appointed a temporary president, someone with common sense. The new rules were simple. No abusive citations, no ridiculous porch limitations, and no Karen-level micromanagement. People started talking again, sitting outside, laughing. There was even talk of organizing a real block party, not the sterile policy approved kind with lemonade stands. An awkward small talk, but a real one with music and lawn chairs and barbecue. I told them I would bring the grill. Karen's house went up for sale 2 weeks later. No big announcement, just a sudden listing and a moving truck that came in the early morning hours. She did not say goodbye. No one expected her to. The next morning I sat on my porch with my tea and my chicken pillow and watched the sun come up. Big Mike rode by on his Harley and gave me a two-finger wave. Ellie dropped by with cookies. Even Brad nodded politely as he jogged past. Peace had returned, not the forced plastic kind used to enforce, but the real kind, the earned kind. I thought that would be the end of it, but a few days later I got a letter in the mail. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, just one sentence typed in the same plain font as the first note. You may have won this time. I read it twice, then tossed it in the trash because sure, maybe I had, or maybe I just reminded a whole neighborhood that porches were not just places to sit, they were places to live. And no HOA president clipboard or not was ever going to take that away from me.